I came home to surprise my wife with the biggest news of my career, but instead I saw her smiling at another man, like I didn't exist. I glanced up from the thick stack of merger contracts that had consumed nearly every waking hour for the last few months. Sitting in the back seat of the black town car that had picked me up at San Francisco International, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while: contentment. Not just relief but genuine satisfaction. This deal wasn't just another notch on the firm's belt, it was a game changer. It elevated our firm to a level I'd only dreamed of when I first started out. All I could think about in that moment was telling my wife, Laura. We'd been talking for months about finally taking that trip to Maui. No more delays. I had even managed to finalize everything 2 days ahead of schedule, an absolute miracle in my line of work. As the driver eased onto Market Street and we coasted past the Palace Hotel, someone on the sidewalk caught my eye. A woman in a sleek, cobalt blue suit strode confidently down the street, her skirt tailored to perfection and flowing elegantly with each step. Her reddish-brown hair framed her face in a way that gave me pause. There was something about her, familiar. Too familiar. As we inched closer, my heart dropped. It was Laura. She always dressed professionally, but today, there was something different. Her outfit had a boldness, a certain intention that I hadn't seen before. My eyes moved instinctively, catching a glint of something gold near her collar, jewelry I didn't recognize. Just then, a man beside her, tall, mid-40s, sharp suit, raised his eyebrows at her, his lips forming words I couldn't hear. Laura covered the mouthpiece of her phone and leaned toward him. "Chris," she said softly as if she'd been caught off guard. "Oh, sorry, I just got a little distracted." She laughed quietly, glancing down the hallway before refocusing on him. I watched her adjust her dress slightly, subtly hiking it up to reveal just the tops of her stockings, her eyes never breaking from his. He smiled, clearly enjoying the moment. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Was this some work meeting I didn't know about? Was I jumping to conclusions? My gut told me I wasn't. Later that evening, I found myself in Monica's office, sitting on the edge of a worn, oversized leather couch. She was a private investigator I'd found through a friend, someone known for discretion and results. I laid everything out for her, every painful, nauseating detail. She listened quietly, only asking a few clarifying questions, but mostly she let me get it all out. "You done?" she asked gently after I'd been rambling for close to 10 minutes. I nodded. My throat was dry, my hands shaking slightly. Monica reached out and took my hand. Her touch was steady, calm. "David," she said, her voice firm but kind, "I can tell how much this hurts. And I know this isn't easy. But if you want me to move forward with the investigation, I need you to step back. Emotion clouds judgment. Let me handle it." I looked Monica in the eyes, trying to keep my voice steady. "All right, just know that whatever you dig up, it might not be easy to see." She nodded, already pulling her coat off the hook. "I understand. Are you staying in town?" "No, I've got to swing by the office to drop off some paperwork first, but after that I'm heading out. I need some space to think." "I'll send Joe Fields over," she said, scribbling something down on a notepad. "You remember Joe, right?" "Of course. You once told me he was the sharpest surveillance guy you ever worked with." "Still true," she said, handing me the note. "Just let him in, give him space, and don't interfere." "Agreed." I sighed and nodded. "Yeah, that's fine." Monica stepped closer than I expected and pulled me into a quick hug. "Take care of yourself, David. And keep your phone on, you'll need to be reachable." "Thanks, Terry," I said softly, using the nickname I gave her back in our field days. "Thanks for being here." She smirked, trying to lighten the mood. "You might not feel so grateful when you see my invoice." I actually laughed a little at that, first time in days. Our friendship dated back to when our daughter Elizabeth started preschool. I was still working as a field agent for the Los Angeles Bureau back then, and Monica was just launching her legal career. Things changed after the shooting. Laura was the one who insisted I walk away from the bureau. Said she couldn't handle another call telling her I might not make it through surgery. And truthfully, I understood. I left. We moved to San Francisco thinking a fresh start would do us good. I wanted to launch my own firm, while Laura sought the reliability that came with a steady paycheck. We ended up following our own tracks, but still together. At least I thought we were. A few days later, I finally made the call to take Brian up on that quiet offer to meet. Holding his card, my hand trembled. My gut churned like I'd swallowed nails. Was this the moment she'd been waiting for? Was she just stringing me along until she found the right time to cut ties? But then, why had she been so excited about our upcoming trip? That had come from her, not me. I was the one dragging my heels about taking time off. I wasn't sure if I was clinging to work out of habit or fear. Maybe both. Still, something didn't sit right. I decided to test the waters. "Hey Beth," I said casually on the phone to Laura's assistant. "Laura's not over at the Palace Hotel this afternoon, is she?" There was a long pause on the other end. "I don't think so, David." "Why do you ask?" "I was just talking to Jake Farber in my office earlier." I lied. "He mentioned he thought he saw her walking into the palace around 2 p.m. Another silence, longer this time. "David, I can't imagine Laura would be anywhere near there. Jake must be mistaken." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the wall in front of me, letting that silence say what words couldn't. "Just make sure Laura gets the message. That's all I ask," I said quietly, not expecting much of a reply. "Of course. Be safe," Terry replied. And those ended up being the last words she ever said to me in person before everything went down. It was a memory from another life, but it hit me like a freight train. That day, during my final operation with the Bureau, everything unraveled in seconds. The man raised his weapon and Michael, my partner at the time, reacted on instinct. One precise shot. The suspect dropped instantly, shock frozen on his face. The gun slipped from his hand as he collapsed onto the frightened hostage. Time slowed. Then came the crash. Tear gas canisters shattered the windows, flooding the room as SWAT moved in. The other robbers turned in confusion, and that's when I squeezed the trigger. One shot dropped the second guy. His rifle clanged onto the tile floor as he went down hard. Michael fired again, this time landing shots that struck the third man cleanly in the head and neck. Another body fell. The last guy looked like he might give up, but adrenaline does strange things. He turned, raising his weapon, and Michael didn't hesitate. He fired. It was over in seconds. Years later, as I sat at Brian's dining room table, it was hard to believe I had ever lived that life. We were just two middle-aged men now, sipping iced tea and staring out at a perfectly trimmed golf course like we belonged to some peaceful world we had never earned. He slid a thick folder across to me. "David, everything's in here. I've gone through all of it. And listen, if there's even a small part of you that still hopes to fix things with Laura, don't open this. Don't read it." I didn't say a word. Just shook my head and flipped open the file. It was all there. Page after page. Detailed surveillance logs of Laura's meetings with Brian over the past few weeks. My team hadn't missed a thing. Every coffee run, every long lunch, every hotel room. My throat tightened as I reached for the vodka he offered, pouring a shot and knocking it back before I could even think. I started to read. Slowly. Methodically. One page at a time. A part of me wanted to burn the whole thing. But another part, the one that needed answers, kept turning the pages. Finally, I pushed the folder aside. My mind was numb. "I can't believe it," I muttered. "She fell for this guy. I mean, she's always been sharp. The one who could see through anyone." I stared off into space, shaking my head. She never even questioned me. Never once asked if anything was wrong. She just checked out. Brian sat quietly. Then he said, "You're seeing the pattern now, right?" He plays it slow. Starts off with compliments, soft flattery, then reels them in. Laura gave up everything for him. I nodded, unable to speak. My heart pounded. Brian pushed another stack of papers toward me, transcripts from conversations, photos, call logs. I didn't even open them. I just held them in my hands like they were burning. "So, what exactly did this guy Brian say to her?" I finally asked. "Well," he said with a sigh, "Mr. Taylor thought he had this all figured out. I really believe he expected to be going on that trip with her, maybe even thought she was going to leave you for good." He paused, his face grim. But he went all in. Told her he loved her. Even got down on one knee and proposed. She turned him down. Despite everything, the flattery, the promises, the proposal, Laura stood her ground. Eventually she had to raise her voice and tell him to leave. She told him plain and simple that it was over. I don't think he believed her until he was out the door. Afterward, I just sat there in silence, feeling the warmth of Brian's hand still lingering on mine. My heart was pounding so loud I half wondered if he could hear it. In that moment, 1,000 feelings crashed through me. I wanted to reach for him. To hold him. To bury my face in his chest and let out everything I'd been holding in. I wanted to give him every ounce of comfort and affection I felt. But there was always a line with Michael, one we never crossed. Our bond had always been deep, maybe even more than friendship, but the romantic part, I kept that buried. Still, I knew it was there. My body ached for something I hadn't let myself feel. A connection I'd been too scared to admit. But those thoughts disappeared quickly when reality came crashing back in. especially thoughts of people like Brian, manipulative and self-serving. A man who fed off weakness, especially from women who just wanted to feel seen. If I didn't dislike Laura so much right then, I might have felt a little sorry for her. When I showed up at her house, I didn't expect to be met with sarcasm. "Terry," she said with a forced smile, "what a surprise. You're a little early for the pity party." "I need to talk to you," I said, holding up the 4 thick manila envelopes in my hand. "If you're looking for Michael, he's still not back from DC. I expect him around 5. "This isn't about Michael," I replied. "This is about you." She led me into the dining room. I followed her, keeping my voice steady. I laid the envelopes on the table one by one. Then I pulled out the last piece, a small handwritten card. "I almost forgot this," I said. "It was a note from Brian. Our time together is so special. I wish we were always together." I looked her dead in the eye. "Found it in your stocking drawer." Laura froze. Her hands trembled as tears welled up in her eyes. "No, no, no," she kept whispering, shaking her head as if saying it enough times would make it all disappear. But I wasn't done. "The final envelope," I said, sliding it toward her, "is a photo gallery. Your boyfriend Brian in room 805 at the Palace Hotel. Different days. Different women." I didn't need to say another word. Her face collapsed under the weight of it all. Tears flowed freely and she started to beg. "Terry, please. I need to see him. I have to talk to David. Tell him I've been so stupid. I love him. Only him. I want him back. I need to feel his arms around me again. Where is he? Please, just tell me where he is." I looked at her, honestly wishing I had an answer. "Laura," I said softly, "if I knew where he was, I tell you, I really would." The surgeons in Zurich had been exceptional. Within days, Michael was stable enough to be released into Gina's care. She took him to an elite hotel, a discreet property owned by Global, quiet, secure, and designed for exactly this kind of situation. One evening, they sat in the lounge by the fire, their conversation trailing off into a comfortable silence. Gina eventually turned to him, her eyes softer, more reflective than usual. "You know," she began, voice calm but deliberate, "there are people in this world who deserve to be wiped out. Like vermin." Michael didn't respond. He sensed she was working her way toward something bigger. "I've gotten to know you on this trip," she continued, swirling the port in her glass. "You're methodical. Honest. You notice everything." She paused again, then looked him straight in the eye. "I want you to consider becoming my chief of security." Michael blinked. He'd assumed she was building toward a job offer with Global, something broad and bureaucratic. But this was different. Personal. Significant. Gina explained that her current chief was set to retire in just a few days, and so far, no one she'd interviewed had the mix of precision, loyalty, and integrity she saw in him. She needed someone who didn't just follow protocol, but someone who understood what it meant to lead under fire. As he listened, Michael reached up and touched the pendant around his neck, an emerald and ruby piece Gina had given him for Christmas. A gesture that meant more than words. God, she thought, I didn't want to fall for him. But somewhere in those few intense weeks she had. What began as duty turned into something unexpected. He wasn't just one of the 6 injured during the pirate raid. Even during the chaotic flight from Djibouti to Zurich, while others groaned in pain or drifted in and out of consciousness, Michael had stayed alert, more focused on the well-being of those he commanded than on his own wounds. He refused morphine until everyone else was stable. That was the kind of man he was. Back in the Bay Area, it was one of those chilled December afternoons where even the sun seemed tired. The cold clung to everything. Megan, Liz, Cassie, and I sat together in the VIP lounge on the 3rd floor of the hangar where Global's fleet was housed. The leather couches were overstuffed and worn in, comforting in their own way. A fire crackled in the corner hearth. We watched the clock. Waited. Every so often, a sharply dressed server in a white coat would slip into the room, quietly updating us on Mr. Connor's flight status. He poured us coffee from a gleaming silver pot. When Cassie requested hot chocolate, with marshmallows, he returned moments later with a delicate china cup and a smile. And when the news finally came that the plane had landed, my heart felt like it skipped. We stood, all of us. When Michael finally walked through the doors, limping slightly but upright, I crossed the room without thinking. I reached him, wrapped my arms around him, and kissed him. The surgeons in Zurich were among the best, and they managed to stabilize Michael faster than any of us expected. After a few days under close observation, he was released into Gina's care. She checked him into one of Global's private luxury hotels, a place so exclusive it didn't even advertise its existence. One evening while they sat in the quiet lounge overlooking the Alps, their conversation drifted into stillness. Then after a long pause Gina turned to him, her expression unreadable. "There are people in this world," she said slowly, "who should be removed, like vermin." Michael didn't say a word. He knew better than to interrupt. She was building to something important. "I've come to understand you on this journey," she went on. "You're meticulous. Honest. You see things others miss." She took a slow sip of her port, then fixed her eyes on him. "Michael, I want you to become my chief of security." The words hit harder than he expected. He'd assumed she was leading up to an offer with Global's broader operations, something corporate. But this was different. Personal. Trusted. Gina explained that her current chief was stepping down in a matter of days. She had gone through a list of candidates but hadn't found anyone who made her feel secure, until now. Michael's hand drifted to the pendant around his neck, a striking emerald and ruby piece Gina had given him for Christmas. A gift that felt far more symbolic than decorative. I didn't want to fall in love with him, Gina thought. I really didn't. But she had. In just a few weeks she'd seen the man behind the uniform. At first he was just one of 6 survivors from the raid they all called Pirate Isle. But even as they evacuated through Djibouti, even in pain, Michael had been more focused on his men than on himself. He refused any heavy medication until the others were accounted for. That kind of selflessness wasn't common. Gina closed her eyes briefly, letting the memory settle. Meanwhile, back in the Bay Area, winter had truly set in. The sun was little more than a pale ornament hanging low in the late afternoon sky. The chill seeped into everything. Megan, Liz, Cassie, and I were waiting at the Global Aviation hangar. We sat close together in the VIP lounge on the 3rd floor, grateful for the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth. The old leather couches creaked softly beneath us, worn but comforting. Every now and then, a quiet, well-dressed server would enter the room with updates on Mr. Connor's flight. He served coffee from a polished silver set and didn't forget Cassie's hot chocolate, complete with marshmallows exactly the way she liked it. And then, finally, we were told the plane had landed. When Michael stepped into the room, it was as if the air shifted. He moved slowly, favoring one side, but he was standing tall. I rose to my feet without hesitation and crossed the room. No words were needed. I threw my arms around him and kissed him. It was just a quick kiss. But the way her body lingered near his, the quiet tenderness in her expression, it told me everything. That kiss wasn't the first. There was history there. And yet it didn't feel like triumph or passion. It felt like a goodbye. She looked at him one last time, then turned and walked toward the plane. Michael and I watched her all the way up the steps and through the cabin door. Just before disappearing from sight, she reached up and wiped tears from her face. I turned to Michael, my heart aching. "What have you done?" I whispered, my emotions a storm I couldn't quiet. Ever since the letter from Yokohama, I'd dreamed of his return, his homecoming. I'd imagined that moment 100 different ways, all ending with us together. Oh, reunited. But seeing her kiss him, seeing the tears in her eyes, made it painfully clear, it hadn't been that simple. I tried not to think about it, not to imagine what he'd gotten her for Christmas, or how many quiet moments they might have shared. Instead, I focused on one night. One beautiful, unforgettable night. Christmas Eve. Michael had hosted a family gathering at the old McGregor estate on Nob Hill. Global provided the house, a grand historic home that had survived the earthquake of 1906. The place had charm, gleaming hardwood floors, antique ship models, thick velvet curtains, and heavy, overstuffed furniture that made it feel like stepping back in time. He asked me to bring Cassie and help host. I remember arriving just in time, catching the last hints of golden light as the sun set over the bay. That night everything felt right. It had been 15 years since I'd felt that kind of peace. That kind of belonging. I only hoped he could feel my love in the way I looked at him, spoke to him, stood by his side. I hoped it reached the wounded parts of him. But even then, I knew something lingered in the room, something no one talked about. And it wasn't Laura's presence that haunted us. It was her absence. Sitting in traffic on the fog-covered Bay Bridge in early January, those thoughts clawed their way back. The joy and laughter of the party had been real, but underneath, there was a quiet heaviness that only a few of us could truly feel. Cassie and I hadn't noticed it much, swept up in the warmth and bustle. But for Michael, for Liz, for Megan, the silence where Laura once stood had been deafening. Later, as we sat together, Liz turned to me. "I really am glad," she said, her voice steady. "I never wanted anything bad to happen to you. I was worried about you." I looked into her eyes, so full of compassion, so familiar. For a moment, it felt like we were back in the early days. Before betrayal. Before loss. My heart pounded, full of feelings I didn't know where to place. But even then, even with the warmth of her words surrounding me, I couldn't ignore the empty space inside. There was still a hole in my soul. I looked at her and whispered, "Thank you, Laura." A wave of emotion surged through me, but I knew I couldn't stay. I gave her a faint smile, my voice gentle. "I'm sorry. I got to head out. Susan, Jake Farber, and a few others from the firm are throwing a farewell lunch for me at one Embarcadero." Laura just stood there watching me. Her expression said what words couldn't. The silence between us held years of memories, regret, and things we never said when we should have. She hadn't truly felt fear, not real, shaking fear, until the moment she imagined Michael seeing her with Brian. Not just the photos. Not even a recording. No, it was the idea of being caught by his eyes in real time that shattered her. That raw, gut-deep shame. Why had I done it? She kept asking herself. When did it all go wrong? She wandered the house in a daze that day, searching for any sign that he had left for good. Had he taken his things? Was his passport missing? The suitcase by the closet? But it was when she opened the safe that the truth truly landed. At the very bottom, where he had once kept only the most sacred things, she found it, his wedding band. Just sitting there. That discovery hit harder than any surveillance photo or transcript ever could. It broke through her denial and crushed whatever fragile hope still lived inside her. Later, when she tried to explain her thoughts to Claudia, her therapist, she could hardly form the words. The session had turned difficult. Edith. "Why is it always about you, Laura?" Claudia asked. "Your fear of growing old alone. Your fear that Michael won't forgive you. That he'll walk away instead of fighting to fix this. But have you stopped to think? What about him?" Laura sat in silence. "You never talk about how he must feel," Claudia pressed, her tone unflinching. "You act like his pain is invisible. He didn't stick around to tell you how broken he was. He just left. And maybe he had every right to. So how do you know he even wants to come back?" The question struck her like a blow to the chest. She had no answer. No defense. With the help of Dr. Chambers, she started digging deeper. "I just want to know why," Claudia asked during one particularly tense session. "Not excuses. The root. The real reason you did what you did." Laura stared down at her hands. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't have a clear answer. It wasn't one big reason, it was a million little ones. But mostly, it was just a terrible, selfish mistake." Her voice broke. "And it's costing me everything." Claudia nodded. "You said Michael is the perfect husband. That he's a devoted father. That he loves you deeply." Laura nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "Then maybe the better question is this. Why didn't you believe that was enough?" Other than the fact that Michael had been away for extended stretches over the past few years, Laura couldn't come up with a single reason to suspect anything. No late-night calls. No unfamiliar perfume. No evidence. And yet, she had let herself believe he was having an affair. She had been willing to push that thought aside, hoping they could still go on that trip together, start fresh. She told herself forgiveness was possible, even if it had to come before a confession. But deep down she had always known. Michael hadn't cheated. The suspicion had been nothing more than a projection of her own guilt, planted in her mind by her actions and carefully nurtured by Brian's casual, manipulative suggestions. And when Terry showed up at the house with the divorce papers, Laura snapped. She screamed at her, demanded to know the name of the other woman. The irony nearly choked her now. She had been furious about a betrayal that never existed, while she herself had already done the worst damage. Later, Michael's words would echo in her memory. They had been so simple yet so sincere. "Because you're the most beautiful woman in San Francisco. And you make me happy." Terry had blushed when he said it. The worry line that had crept across her brow when she stepped out of the van seemed to disappear. She smiled, her body softening as if some great impossible question had finally been answered. During the 45-minute drive down to Palo Alto, they talked about Terry's work, Cassie's adjustment after winter break, and a dozen other mundane things. It was easy. Familiar. But eventually Michael had to ask. Why would she do it, Terry? Why risk everything? Terry looked out the window for a long moment. Maybe she wanted to provoke you. Make you jealous. Make you pay more attention to her. She's insecure, she continued, her voice gentler now. You were always her rock. Her security. She relied on your love, every bit of it. And then one day you were gone. And not just for a weekend or a business trip. You were gone for years. Michael bristled. That's not fair. I know, Terry said, her tone understanding. But you know Laura better than anyone. You know how her mind works. It may not excuse anything, but it does explain some things. Later that evening, she sat across from him in silence. Then quietly she pulled her chair away from the table and slumped into it, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs were deep and unrestrained, raw grief, not for the first time but perhaps for the first time truly felt. Michael had never seen her like that in all their years together. Not even once in 25 years. He handed her a box of tissues, then quietly stepped into the kitchen to bring her a glass of water. The simple gesture, his calm, his presence, meant more to her than any apology. When she could finally speak, her voice cracked through the silence. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said. "For everything. I never wanted you to see me like this," Laura whispered through broken breath, her voice trembling beneath the weight of shame. "I wanted you to remember me as the strong, confident woman I used to be. I'm sorry, so sorry." But her words barely made it through the quiet hum in the room, the air thick with all they had lost. Michael held the photo in his hand, the one of Laura in the Palace Hotel robe, her head turned just slightly, that faint, knowing smile playing at her lips. "That smile," he said softly. "Do you remember it? You used to give that look to me." He looked at her, the photo clenched tightly in his fingers. "I saw it countless times. That smile used to be mine. But now it belonged to someone else." He took a deep breath and looked away for a moment, as though he could find something stable to anchor to. "I've kept this picture with me," he said. "Got it right before I left for Asia. At first, it fueled my rage, and the anger." He paused. "Yes, Laura. Rage. Anger. Real, ugly emotions. I carried them with me every day. And I asked myself over and over, how does a man hate the same woman he's loved for 25 years? She said nothing. Her head slowly lowered, resting against the polished wood of the table. The medication had dulled the edges of her panic but hadn't touched the ache inside. She wrapped her arms around her head as if she could shield herself from the weight of his voice. The silence between them echoed with all the things that had gone unsaid. "How did we get here?" she thought. "How did I become so blind?" She slowly lifted her head, searching for her purse. Her fingers found the amber bottle inside. She opened it and quietly counted the pills in her palm. 6, 7, 8, 9. Probably not enough. But the thought wasn't about today. Maybe next time after the refill. If the ache didn't go away. If the weight didn't lift. Later that night, as they sat quietly across from each other, Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. It rested in his palm for a moment before he extended it to her. My heart lurched. It looked like a ring box. My hands trembled as I took it and opened it slowly. Inside, a stunning diamond sparkled in the low light. It was breathtaking. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Oh my God, Michael?" He gently lifted the ring from the box and reached for my left hand. But just as his fingers touched mine, I pulled back. "Michael," I said, voice unsteady, "before I can accept this ring, before I can even think about a future, I need to know the truth." I looked into his eyes. "Who was the woman on your plane?" He looked down, pausing for a long moment. Then, finally, he told me everything. And I listened, not just to his words, but to the weight behind them, the exhaustion in his voice, the truth he had carried silently. That moment didn't heal everything. But it was a beginning. The first honest beginning we'd had in years. Michael later brought her on as Deputy Chief of Security at Global. She took the role seriously and she stayed close. A trusted colleague, yes, but more than that, she remained a welcome part of our family. A few weeks after Mickey was born, Michael and I were married. The ceremony took place at the house on Nob Hill. It felt like home. Mr. McGregor, in a gesture that still moves me, walked me down the aisle. Michael's longtime friend, Jake Farber, stood beside him as his best man. Among our guests were faces from across Michael's life, people who had stood with him in battle and in peace. Sergeant Major Sloan attended, and so did Janice Elders, the helicopter pilot who once saved Michael's life in a war zone. She wore a brilliant diamond ring that caught every glint of sunlight, and the way she looked at her fiancé told us everything. They were deeply in love. That day the air was filled with peace. It was a kind of comfort I hadn't believed I'd feel again. But life isn't always neat. Not long after the wedding, I found Michael one morning standing outside our house looking pale, tired, and more than a little shaken. "Terry," he said, startled. "You scared me." He tried to play it off. "No, I'm fine. Just had a rough night. Thought I'd go for a run." I frowned. "You don't look fine. Are you sick?" He waved me off. No. Just feel stupid. Took a spill. Must be getting old. Can't keep my footing anymore." He forced a smile, but his eyes told another story. They looked haunted, distant. "Let's get inside," I said. "You need a shower and probably a strong cup of coffee." He didn't argue. He followed me in quietly. Later, I would learn that Washington, D.C. had become one of his more frequent stops, though he didn't talk about it much. He'd changed since the raid, since the betrayal, since everything. As for Laura, Helen to most, she had re-entered society with the grace and charm she was known for. On one particular evening, she paused before exiting the high-end salon downtown. Her reflection in the full-length mirror gave her pause. She adjusted her earrings, then smiled. Tonight she would be seen. Maybe even admired. The symphony gala would be filled with familiar names, and she hoped to make an impression on the young conductor. Maybe her photo would even appear in the paper. Just as she reached for her sunglasses at the door, a voice called out, "Oh, Mrs. Connor, just a second." She turned, still smiling.